Hey everybody, I am back. Finally got my computer back, which I'm super excited about. Feeling a little bit tired and stressed out at the moment, so hopefully this will be fine. But I usually say that, and then of course, 2 minutes in, I start talking too much. Anyways, I've looked at your last discussion board earlier this morning. I didn't get a chance to check everything, and of course, you have until tomorrow to do it. And I'm recording this Wednesday afternoon just because I want to make sure I have enough time to put it up in time so you can all watch it, sometime early-ish tomorrow. And so far as the posts that I've seen, y'all are doing a great job with this book. Many of you are clear that it's hard for you to understand these people. It's hard for us to be, for those of us who are maybe more liberal or progressive, to like look at these folks, the folks that Arlie Hochschild is writing about in Strangers in Their Own Land, kind of as an anthropologist, really try to understand them in their own terms, the way they understand themselves, and without judging, of course, at first, as a methodological relativist. And then maybe only after you kind of understand the logics that guide their lives, their values, their practices, can we come to a more adequate understanding of that? And then maybe, if you want to evaluate or judge them, that's up to you. As I've said a million times, this class isn't about morals or politics. It's about cultural difference and how to study it. And we've come all the way from the Amazon to the United States, and ethnographic methods, cultural anthropological methods, are just as useful here as they are anywhere else. There's a few other things I want to talk about before we jump in to chapters 2 and 3 of the Hochschild book. I put up the new syllabus online. I urge you all to look at it. It has a new reading schedule, and especially useful is that timeline of, when stuff is going to come up, when you're supposed to have it done by. So I took with the other syllabi off just not to cause confusion. So the one up there is the only one there for the rest of the semester, unless there's some other problem, and then I'll change it again. Now, one new thing I'm doing is tomorrow, which may be today, actually when you're watching this, Thursday, April 9th, we're going to have a live video chat via Blackboard Collaborate Ultra. I just went into my class's Blackboard pages and created a tool you'll see on the left hand when you log in that says live video chat. And there's one scheduled for this class to begin at noon. So you just click on that. A session should open. I think you can log in up to 15 minutes beforehand or at that time, and you'll pop up to me as a participant. I've got it set so that we can see each other on video. We can talk. There's a little chat function. I'll talk about how to use that when you're there so you can type things instead of talking. I'm not muting anybody to begin with, but if 60 people are on there and we all have dogs barking in the background, it might be a little bit harder. So there's a little function where you can kind of wave your hand. I can call on you and then unmute you rather than just allowing everybody to talk. But maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like not all 60 folks are going to be on there tomorrow. Maybe we'll only have 5 people or 10 people, but we'll give it a try. I mean, if nobody signs on, that'll be sad. It could just be one person and me, and that'll be fine. And the most it'll go for is an hour, maybe less than that. We're all busy. We all have things to do right now. So give it a try. It should be fun. By the way, I had so many problems with that medial function of video responses to discussion board. I didn't see anybody who tried to do it. I think all of my issues were with internet speed. Out in the country. I'm back in San Antonio now. As you can see, this is a different room. By the way, that's not laundry over there. Those are clothes to bring to Goodwill. But they've been there for like 2 years or something. One of those things that I'm too lazy and never get around to doing. So I have a better internet connection here. I'm also using QuickTime rather than Photo Booth to record this. We'll see if it makes a difference in quality or size of file or anything like that. But it should go well. So let's dig into it. Arlie Hochschild's book, the second installment, we're reading 2 chapters for each session now. As you'll notice by now, it's a really easy read. It's really well written. Shouldn't take you too long to read 2 chapters. Whereas some of the other books, it's 1 chapter at a time because it's harder stuff. So I titled this lecture Petrochemicals, Government, and Freedom. These are the big questions in Hochschild's book. It's what's so great about this book, teaching it after my own book, because the oil industry is just as present in Louisiana, where the book is set, as it is in Amazonian Ecuador, probably even more so. And what's really striking reading these 2 chapters is the levels of contamination that the residents of South Louisiana have been exposed to, and the levels of sickness that have been caused by that contamination, especially in chapter 3 about the Areno family. Just cancer, 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 and the same kinds of stories. People in Doreno, Kofan people, talk about fish smelling. And you have one of the Areno children, and he catches a fish, butchers it, and then smells the flesh. And if it doesn't smell that bad, he too will eat it, just like Kofan people. And we hear about open pits. We hear about stuff dumped right into the waterways. This is the same stuff going on in the United States of America that was going on in Amazonian Ecuador, maybe still is, and it still may be occurring here. Now, as far as I know, Louisiana has some of the most lax environmental controls of any state in the country. It's one of the most contaminated states in the country, and the petrochemical industry is really important there. I think we'll talk about a huge industrial complex in a later chapter owned by a conglomerate called Sasol, which is the world's first natural gas liquefaction plant. Billions and billions of dollars there. So this isn't even petrochemicals per se. This is, hydrocarbons. This is oil. We are the world's #1 producer right now, the United States of America. I think we overtook Saudi Arabia not that long ago. So oil is here, just like it is in a country like Ecuador. So what I want you to do for the discussion board for today, I just put this clip here about PPG, Pittsburgh Plate Glass, which is the main company that did a lot of the contamination that Lee Sherman dealt with and the Arenos dealt with. When I do this with an actual class in class, we have people kind of comment on and take apart this 2-minute clip that Pittsburgh Plate and Glass. Now I'm thinking plate and glass or paint and glass. I forget. PPG, I'm getting confused now. This is PR that they put out. It's a 2-minute video that talks about all the awesome things they do in the world, how so many of their products are really environmentally friendly, how they bring joy and life to people. And actually what's interesting is how they say they take cues, from nature and plants in developing their products. And some of the products do the same things the plants do. So this is the way the company is portraying itself to the world. And of course, reading this book, we have a very different image of the company. So I ask students to reflect on how corporations present themselves, and then how people like Lee Sherman and the Arenos talk about what those actual corporations do on the ground. The interesting thing about Lee Sherman, he actually did it himself. He worked for PPG and with his own hands contaminated the waterways and almost died because of it, and definitely got sick because of it. So take a look at that film. It's just a short clip, 2 minutes. It's really interesting. But what I want you to do for the discussion board is I want you to compose a question. Hochschild is a sociologist, but she's an ethnographer, and I want you to think of yourself as an ethnographer. You don't have access to all of the methods and the questionnaires and the interview scripts that she had while she was doing work for this book. But if you had a chance to go down and speak to Lee Sherman or speak to someone in the Areno family, I want you to come up with a question you would ask them that really gets at the heart of the issues that this book is about. About the relationship between environmental pollution, the government, values like freedom and prosperity, and what it means to live a good or moral life. So be an ethnographer, come up with a question that you would ask these people to get at any of those central themes, something that is really stuck in your craw, something you don't understand but want to understand, or really really open-ended question. What does freedom mean to you? How do you conceptualize the government? Or why don't you trust the government? Any of these things. Come up with a question, and I'll take a look at those before I put the next video lecture together. So Lee Sherman. Lee Sherman's a character. I really love Hochschild's, I don't say Arlie because I don't know her and haven't met her, unlike Casey and Beth, whom I know and am friends with. I'm not sure I'm getting a pronunciation of Hochschild right, but that's the way I'm going to say it. So Lee Sherman is a really interesting guy. In many ways, he thinks of himself as an environmentalist. He files lawsuits, he kind of protests. He's in his 80s when this book was written. I don't know if he's still alive. My sense is he probably is. He's a durable old guy. Played football, raced for NASCAR, And he, of course, is a big Tea Party activist. Totally for free, he goes out and tries to recruit and put yard signs for the Tea Party all over South Louisiana. So he's the kind of guy that Hochschild wants to understand. He lives in a parish. Louisiana is unique in this country. They don't have counties. They have parishes. Calcasieu, probably not the correct pronunciation. It's among the 2% of U.S. counties or parishes with the highest emissions of toxic chemicals per capita. So a really, really, really contaminated place. He worked for Pittsburgh Plate Glass. It is plate glass, not paint glass. PPG, a petrochemical plant. And his job was to fix pipes out of which toxic chemicals were spilling. He talks in this chapter about no safety equipment, no contamination controls, no real worker safety rules that are actually enforced. In a later chapter, we'll talk about this value, this ideal image of the cowboy and the risk taker. Lee Sherman definitely fits into that. And it's a certain kind of masculinity too, right? Putting yourself into harm's way and not worrying about the consequences. That's a value that's very important in South Louisiana, especially to men, and it's tied into conservative philosophy too for a lot of these people, how they live it in their everyday lives. So Lee admits, and he admitted it in an open speaking engagement too, that he personally, secretly, well, with company orders, illegally dumped toxic waste into a nearby wetland, into a marsh for PPG. Went there when it was kind of dark, and I think he called the hard bottoms in the tanks from the petrochemical plant, this like dark tarry sludge that's just super, super dangerous stuff. Just pulled his truck back there and just dumped this shit right into the swamps. He did this personally. Did it for many years, loyally and without complaining. At work, there was an accident. He suffered a chemical burn at PPG. He was hurt really, really badly. Just got back to work, and then PPG fired him. According to Hochschild, he was fired because PPG did not want to pay his medical disability after he'd given his life and his body and his health to them. So in my mind, the company didn't do him too well. Something else Hochschild talks about in this chapter was this big event, a die-off or a kill-off of fish in the local bayou, the local swamp. So all these fish died, and the government came in and they told people to stop eating fish, to minimize it, maybe eat fresh caught fish a couple times a month, or even better, don't eat them at all, especially if you're in some risky population group. So you might see this as the government coming in and trying to protect people from corporate malfeasance and watching out for the government. But the local people, they were actually extremely angry for the government coming in and telling them not to eat contaminated fish and showing them that the fish were contaminated and that if they ate them, they would probably get sick. What did they call it? The government doing this, they called it a job killer. These are people who many of whom live by selling seafood, by their fishermen and people who gather oysters, shrimpers. So they didn't know, or they didn't think, or they weren't able to sell what they caught anymore, and there goes their money, there goes their jobs. So even though many outsiders would say the government's doing its job, it's protecting them, protecting the environment, they didn't see it that way. They saw it as the government causing them poverty. Man, is this stuff relevant right now? You can see these exact same kinds of debates and arguments coming out about COVID-19, about coronavirus. Should the government be keeping people from working to protect ourselves and protect the most vulnerable among us? What do people say? Well, they say, many folks, especially folks on the right, that the government is killing jobs, it's killing the economy, and it shouldn't be doing that. So think about how this book relates to your own fears, your own life, and your own politics right now, whether you're on the left or the right. Fishermen, including Lee, eventually filed a lawsuit against PPG, and they won $12,000 each for lost income caused by the contamination that was caused by PPG. So these people don't like the government, they like the company, yet they sued the company, and they took a lot of money from it. Using legal means, i.e. working through the government to make it happen. How do you put all that together? You assume as an anthropologist there is a coherent logic to these people's lives. We see things that look like contradictions. Let's try to think them to get about them, put them into a puzzle, solve this riddle. How is there some coherence there? What is the logic that's guiding these people in these kinds of actions? The next slide is more about Lee Sherman and his stance on as government, regulation in general. Lee Sherman for Hochschild is what we call a key informant. He's someone, by telling his personal story, she can tell us about much broader social and cultural and political phenomenon. So she really looks at him to get this. So despite all of his experiences with corporate wrongdoing, with toxic contamination, with medical problems, Lee became more and more conservative as the years went on. You think about somebody being worried about health and environmental destruction, which Lee was, as becoming perhaps more liberal, but that's not the way it worked for Lee. He felt that the government has betrayed him, not the companies, not PPG, not industry. He thinks that companies like PPG should clean up their mess, the same phrase we talk about Texaco and then Chevron. But he doesn't think the government's going to make him do that, nor does he think the government could do that. It kind of sidesteps the question of whether they should. Lee just has zero trust in the government doing anything. He has more trust in the goodwill and responsibility of companies like PPG. In fact, Lee wants to totally gut and dismantle the Environmental Protection Agency, something we've seen right now. Trying not to be partisan here, but President Trump, partially, according to him, in response to these economic crises, has put on hold all of the EP rules about clean water and clean air during this time. So companies don't have to abide by rules to protect the environment right now. And for a lot of conservative folks, getting rid of government regulation, including environmental regulation via bodies like the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, that's part of their political vision and political strategy. And the EPA has been radically weakened. Of course, it was created by a Republican president, I believe Richard Nixon. But now most Republicans want to do away with these federal and sometimes even state regulatory bodies. So Lee, in many ways, he felt like the government has given him nothing except grief. But PPG, even though potentially caused health problems and ruined an environment he loved, they gave him a life. They paid him. They enabled his life. So that's what they gave to him. What has the government given to Lee? Nothing, according to him, although he's on Social Security. Something I mentioned in the last lecture, people in states like Louisiana actually get more in federal services by a dollar count than they end up paying to the federal government in taxes. Red states tend to get more on balance than blue states do. States like New York and California that actually pay a lot to the government through taxes don't get as much in benefits back. It's one of these contradictions or paradoxes. Do these people know about it? Do they not know about it in places like Louisiana? What do they have to say about it? We'll learn later that a lot of these people do use sometimes government welfare services. They feel really ashamed about it when they do, some more than others. So why does Lee really hate the government? And why do people like him hate the government? And Hochschild lays it out very nicely in this chapter. Lee believes that government restricts people's practice of religion. It keeps people from being good Christians. He's a Mormon. I think the Arenos are Pentecostals. So these aren't Catholics here, even though Louisiana is traditionally a very Catholic state. Bobby Jindal, the time, an Indian, a South Asian man, was a devout Catholic. He was the governor then. I don't know if he's still the governor. I don't think so. So Lee thinks that the government is trying to keep people from practicing their religion, mainly Christianity. Also, Lee doesn't like the fact that he has to pay taxes, especially so much in taxes. Why? Especially because he thinks most of those taxes go to help people he considers to be lazy and undeserving. We'll get to a central metaphor in the lives of people like Lee at a later point in this book, and it's this idea of waiting in line. They feel like they've been waiting in line, they've been working hard, they've been dealing with all this pollution and crap and getting sick. So if anybody should get something, it should be them. Yet there are those who have cut in line. These are their words and their terms, and jumped right to the front. Undocumented workers, and people in all these new protected classes who haven't been working as hard, who haven't been working as long, who maybe didn't suffer as much, and they're getting government support while Lee is just paying out and not getting any support. And he really hates the government for that, taking money he's earned and giving it to people who don't work hard and don't deserve it. Finally, and this is an interesting point, and I get this one pretty much, and it makes a lot of sense to me. Lee doesn't like the government because he feels it destroys people's honor. Now, what does he mean by that? The government takes taxes from you and redistributes it to people who supposedly need it to live, to survive, to get through hard times. Now, Lee doesn't have a choice there. He's not freely, through his own voluntary, impulse to give charity, giving that money away. That would be an honorable, ethical, moral thing to do. The government coerces you into doing it. And Lee feels like that's a destruction of people's honor. Now, Lee's actually probably a pretty good guy in all sorts of ways. Kind of guy who'll give you the shirt off his back. If you get stuck on the road and your tire's flat, Lee's probably going to stop and help you change that tire. We hear even when he didn't have much money, he and his wife would take the little they had, do without, and buy Christmas presents for poor kids. That was something he chose to do as a good ethical man, probably as a good Christian, good Mormon in his mind, and something he felt really good about. Nobody forced him to do that. If you force somebody to do something, it's not something they choose on their own, and hence it's not moral in that way. And the government doesn't allow people, through charity, through voluntary means, to help each other out. As community members, it forces them to, and that's not a good thing. So those are the 3 reasons why Lee and many other people in this book hate the government. Now, I just have one slide on the Arenos, the family that are the topic of chapter 3. Very sad family. Really great descriptions here from Hochschild about what it's like to be from this place, to live in this place, South Louisiana. They live on the bayou. I can't pronounce it, so I'm not going to try to. That PPG and Lee have been dumping contaminants into for many, many years. Almost everybody in their community, everybody around them, relied on the bayou, on the swamp, to sustain themselves. They drank water from it. They hunted in it. They fished in it. One of the Areno family members said, geez, we just go to the store maybe once a month to get like sugar and vanilla. And that was it. They grew their food, they fished their food, they hunted their food, they got water directly. These are like Kofan people. They live off the environment, and very proud of it and love it. Now, something I mentioned in the last lecture, or maybe, it was the last lecture, like these are very specific people, most of them you hear about in this book. Most of them, or many of them, are Acadians. They were forced out of Canada, French Canada, by the British after the British won a war in the 1700s, and they were pushed all over the Northern Hemisphere, and eventually a number of them were resettled in South Louisiana, and these people from Canada, these French-speaking people, were forced to live in the swamps in the 1700s, formed relations with Native Americans living there, displaced Native Americans living there, and created an entirely new way of life, speaking their language, Cajun, French, that many of them still speak, although now less and less. So some of the older folks in the Areno family didn't even go to school, because if you spoke French, you weren't supposed to go to school. You were told you shouldn't be there. You were dissuaded from it because public schools were speaking English. So these are people whose history is complicated, marginalized, oppressed. They're an ethnic minority in many ways, and they live really close to the land. So instead of letting that, so once, like I said last time, if you feel like this book is a general indictment of conservatives in general, it's about very specific people. But maybe it's especially interesting because these are people you would expect to be stereotypically more liberal, because they're an ethnic minority, they're so closely tied to the land, they have a history of oppression, but they're actually extremely, extremely conservative. So they're a really interesting ethnographic object. So the Arenos are different from a lot of people in this area. Most people living on that bayou have left. And they've forced themselves to forget what the environment like, what the good times were like. And now my dog is barking. Danny, no barking. Because, environmental destruction is the sacrifice we make for jobs, for prosperity, for capitalism. So don't be nostalgic. Don't think about what our lives were like before, how beautiful everything was, how much we enjoyed hunting and fishing. Focus on the present and the future and jobs. The Aranos don't forget. Hochschild calls them the rememberers. They've had so many people in their family who've died of cancer. Just really awful rates of environmentally linked, cancer incidents and cancer mortality in their family. Probably majority of it due to petrochemical pollution through corporations like PPG. So the Aranos remember all this loss, all this destruction. They really desire economic progress, but they don't want to forget the old times, the people they've loved and lost. They're very environmentally aware people too. They actually believe in climate change and global warming. Of course, they're very devout Pentecostals, Christians as well, and they associate global warming with a passage from Revelations about the heating up of the end times. So they're environmentalists in many ways, but they're very clean living people. Don't use many substances or anything like that. And they put the Bible first. They want elected officials to be strong Christians. It's mainly their faith, their strong Christianity, that determines their very strong identity as Republicans. To them, to be a really strong Christian is to be Republican, and it's hard to be a strong Christian and be a Democrat for all sorts of reasons, according to them. They do believe in some regulation. They hate what's happened to the area they grew up in, the area that most of them still live in, even though most of their neighbors have moved off because it's impossible to live in a devastated landscape anymore. They do want the government to do a better job, but they also want those jobs. They believe in free enterprise, the free market, capitalism. So they're in a bind. They kind of want two things at once, and as a liberal or progressive might say, those things aren't compatible. At least not with the industry and the technology you have there. And the Aranos are kind of at an impasse. They kind of are in a difficult position in terms of what they want and how they live right now. And something that we really need to remember when we think about conservative, especially Christian conservatives, notions of environmental change, environmental catastrophe, there's a huge portion of the American population who identifies as a Christian, especially evangelical Protestant Christian, that believe the rapture is coming. The earth will be remade, Jesus will come back. And so why worry about something that's going to happen in 100 or 1,000 years to the environment and to your descendants if the world's going to be remade through divine action? So they think a lot about the afterlife and the second coming. And so they take a lot of comfort in how hard their lives are, how much the land has been destroyed, and all of this sickness. They take comfort with the idea that they'll soon die and be in heaven. And some very touching passages, and maybe very sad depending on your perspective. They say in heaven there is no contamination. The environment is totally pure. And I think it's maybe the title of the last chapter of this book. They say there are beautiful trees in heaven. So I know it's easy to feel that these people are wrong or stupid or ignorant for some of you. But if you really take that perspective seriously, these people's eschatological beliefs, their beliefs of what happens after they die, it really puts their environmental positions into a much more understandable frame for most of us. So I'm going to leave it for that. Hopefully this video turns out well. I'm going to try to upload it into iMovie and put these slides in and do it the old way. And with a good connection, I should be able to get it up there sometime soon. So hope you all are doing well. Hopefully I'll see some of you in that video chat session, and take care of yourselves and be safe. Thank you.